MOS Alvin Tan.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise in support of the motion to thank our President for her address. Last week, I was sworn in as a Member of Parliament at Old Parliament House. Standing in those chambers, taking my oath of allegiance, a sense of history overwhelmed me. I could not help but wonder how our founding leaders, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, Mr. S. Rajaratnam, Dr. Goh Keng Swee, must have felt in those chambers, the fate of Singapore in their hands, facing a bleak and uncertain future. It must be in their late 30s, 40s, around my generation. How did they feel inheriting a newly independent country, facing a crisis of survival? What went through their minds as they wrestled with the exigencies of their time? Were jobs the priority? Defense, the environment, social cohesion, race and religion? Where did they start? And how did they start? So we stand here today as one house in these new chambers, facing the proverbial crisis of our generation. And we are again faced with the questions that confronted our forefathers. Where do we find jobs? How do we build a cohesive Singapore? How do we protect our environment? Our founding leaders found opportunities and hope in crisis by finding new ways of doing business, making tough decisions about race and religion, and building a clean and green city. They developed our industries, forged a new society, and built a modern Singapore, handing it over to us in excellent order. That Singapore is now in our hands. And what we do in this crisis matters. This crisis is not a temporary deviation from our previous path, but one that will permanently change our lives as we know it. As President Halimah Yacob said last week, there is no going back to the status quo ante, and COVID-19 has indeed reshuffled the deck. Mr. Speaker, we are living through what has been termed as the Great Reset. While this poses many unprecedented challenges, it also provides us with an opportunity to do things differently, to reimagine and rebuild on the strong foundations of our forefathers. I will touch on three such opportunities: the opportunity to protect, the opportunity to create, and the opportunity to include. To begin with, the opportunity to protect. COVID-19 forced the whole world to a pause. Unintentionally, this pause gave us a chance to take a step back, examine and be deliberate as we move forward. One of the first and possibly the only direct positive outcome of COVID-19 is its impact on the environment. The sound of planes was audibly replaced by the sounds of birds. Nature was recovering as humanity stayed at home. And now, as we slowly try to unpause, we have the opportunity to better balance the sounds we'd like to hear, to better protect and steward the environment for our children as we rebuild our economy. And now we have an opportunity to do this, as Eli Sim of Palm View Primary School wrote in a published National Day essay. So Eli wrote that he hopes that Singaporeans will, quote, learn to protect the precious forests, beaches and reservoir parks. I hope everyone in Singapore will do his or her part to turn Singapore from a little red dot into a big green dot in future and be a role model for other countries, unquote. Indeed, as Eli says, Singapore must be a big green dot in a rapidly warming world. Global warming has led to higher temperatures and rising sea levels. We've seen the effects of this in the past, right in my constituency, where our low-lying Pekyo and Cambridge Road neighbourhood experienced floods. An old flood gauge still sits at the corner of Carlisle and Cambridge Road, reminding us of our vulnerabilities. One of my first priorities as MP of Moulmein Cane Hill was also to deal with the environment, and I'm sure many in this house also have been dealing with it, dengue. We have dengue clusters across our country and even in my constituency, and we've set up a dengue task force to deal with it decisively. Locally, we've also set up Our Green Pekyo, which is a popular, ground-up initiative to drive awareness and action against climate change. It's a popular initiative with our residents, very young residents, devoting their energy to transform their communities and neighborhood. Specific projects include climate change conversations, which speak about the impact of climate change or the relationship between climate change and our fragile environment. We have our Bring Your Own Container initiative, which helps our residents reduce public waste. So these are all ground-up initiatives we should encourage. But these are small steps which are slowly, certainly changing attitudes and practices on the ground, and we should do more of these. Mr. Speaker, environmental concerns can indeed be balanced against economic growth. This pandemic has given us the chance to restructure our economy towards sustainable and green solutions while remaining economically competitive. As the Minister for Sustainability and Environment mentioned last week, 55,000 new jobs will be created in the sustainability sector over the next decade in areas such as high-tech agriculture and aquaculture. This reflects the government's commitment to foster a greener economy, and we must press on with these efforts. Now, protecting our environment is not just about protecting our lives, but also securing our livelihoods, which brings me to my second opportunity, which is the opportunity to create. Now, as Cheryl had mentioned earlier, the Great Reset has accelerated the process of digitalization faster than any of us has expected. It has displaced jobs, and many of our industries like aviation, tourism, and construction have been significantly hit. It has affected how we consume and how and where we work. At this juncture, there are opportunities that we can create, find, and must seize. We must be nimble and use it to our advantage for our country and our people. First, our country. We must continue to strengthen Singapore's position regionally and globally. An oasis in a COVID-19 world. Safe, stable, incorruptible, and open to the world. These are traits that my former colleagues and I in the private sector, even pre-COVID-19, look for when deciding where to situate billions of dollars of investment. And make no mistake, when we draw up plans, our strategic investment plans, Singapore is but one of many countries we considered. If we and others decided to choose another investment destination, these jobs would have been situated elsewhere, and Singaporeans would certainly be poorer for it. So we must continue to enhance this reputation as investors look for a place they can trust, unleash their ideas, talent, and capital. The result is innovation, investments, and opportunities for Singaporeans. Of course, as my colleagues have said, we must ensure that Singaporeans are treated fairly. Now, investments and opportunities can choose us or choose others. I'd much rather they choose us. And they will be choosing a steady ship that is seaworthy in a storm. The Honourable Mr. Leon Pereira referred to our economy yesterday as a Titanic. I'd like to suggest that this is a mischaracterization. Our economy has been going on for 55 years. Not always smooth, but always delivering opportunities for Singapore and Singaporeans. We have encountered many major problems and crises: separation, the British withdrawal, the oil crisis, the '85 recession, SARS, the Asian financial crisis, the global financial crisis. We have never encountered a problem we did not bounce back from stronger. This is the mettle of our country and our people. Why? Because we do not assume that we are invulnerable. We are always worried, in fact, about our vulnerability, almost to the point of paranoia. Planning for contingencies, learning, adapting. We have been driving transformation re-engineering our economy as we keep going. The industrial transformation maps are the latest version of a long line of efforts to ensure that we keep Singapore in the best possible condition, not just for now, but also for the future. During calmer waters, there were voices in this chamber telling us not to worry, that we can risk our stability and our reserves. Well, we have seen clearly why we have safeguarded our reserves. We have now deployed them in this crisis to help our people to reinvent themselves and to create opportunities for us to keep on going into the future. So, Mr. Speaker, I would like to suggest that we are not quite the Titanic. I'd like to suggest we are the Starship Enterprise, always exploring new frontiers and making friends with people from many different places. As my colleague Dr. Tan See Leng had mentioned a couple of days ago, we will live long and prosper. Mr. Speaker, preparing Singapore well for global competition also means preparing our firms well to seize global opportunities. Given the rapid global digitalization, Singapore benefited from its early investment in digital transformation. We had a head start in the race, and while we were preparing for a marathon, COVID-19 has forced us into a sprint. Coming from the private sector, I look forward to working closely with our industry partners as we step up our digitalization efforts, supporting businesses, including family-run small and medium enterprises. Second, our people. Now, LinkedIn data shows that the most in-demand jobs globally are in sales, healthcare, software engineering, and project management. 3 out of these 4 jobs are also highest in demand for remote employment. This means that, as Shawil mentioned earlier, they can be performed anywhere in the world, regardless of the employer's location. Remote jobs are a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it means anyone living outside of Singapore can get a job based in Singapore, but on the other hand, it also means Singaporeans can apply for a job overseas while living at home right here in Singapore. Jobs are now increasingly not confined by geographical borders. We must prepare our people to compete on the global platform and take on these emerging jobs. But this is easier said than done. Advising a mid-career administrator to take on a software engineering role is tough and difficult. Upskilling through SkillsFuture can help. But once you've acquired that skill, how do you then make that shift? How do you then make that shift? And this is a question I've heard many times on the ground from job seekers, and I'm sure many in this house have also heard from your residents as well. When I was at my previous company, my team and I partnered with the Institute of Technical Education to help all of our IT students showcase their skills on their digital resumes so that machine learning algorithms can help notify them of potential job matches in Singapore, but also outside of Singapore, opening the market for our students. So I look forward to working with SkillsFuture and My Careers Future teams to prepare and to better prepare, but also promote our people so that they can better compete for jobs in Singapore and beyond. For younger Singaporeans, the SG United Traineeships program is enhancing their competitiveness too, helping them get valuable on-the-job training. I remember taking on an unpaid internship when I was younger, and the experience and networks I gained stood me in good stead for the future jobs I would apply for and take on in future. So we must continue to support Singaporeans, young and old, transform themselves out of this crisis. The choice is clear. We either reinvent ourselves to meet the demands of the future or be relegated to the footnotes of the past. And this brings me to my third opportunity, that is the opportunity to include, to be more accepting of people with different backgrounds and journeys. I will speak on including Singaporeans of different abilities and emphasize 2 aspects. The first is something close to my heart and is related to the ability to succeed and the stigma of failure. Mr. Speaker, when Madam President spoke about including people who have traversed different paths, it reminded me of my own journey, and I reflected on how far we have come and how much further we still have to go. I had to repeat a year in junior college and even so did not do well enough for my A-level examinations to qualify for any local universities. I remember feeling dejected, uncertain about my future, and dealing with the societal stigma. Even later on in my career, I faced other rejections. But along my journey, some took a chance on me, not really based on my grades, but on ability, reputation, values, work ethic, even volunteer experience. And I will always be thankful for these chances. But Mr. Speaker, we cannot just rely on these second chances. We need to level the playing field with policies and norms that systematically empower people and give them the chance they need to prove themselves. To this end, the government has rolled out measures in recent years to mitigate the lottery of birth. And yet too far, we often hear concerns that our system penalizes people too heavily for the setbacks of their past, where grades from your O-levels or A-levels disproportionately dictate your career path, where we congratulate people for defying the odds without questioning why the odds were put there in the first place. I remember years ago applying for a few mid-career jobs in government and having to input my PSLE, O-level, A-level grades, and the recruiters not valuing my experience in the SAF or even volunteer work. Conversely, the private sector firms I interviewed with did not require those grades, and they valued my experience even in the SAF and volunteer work, among others, in their hiring decisions. It was an easy choice for me to choose which sector to join. In my time interviewing and hiring people for our companies, I looked beyond traditional barometers of success like grades and schools to skills and micro-credentials, which is what Mariam Jaffar mentioned yesterday, the Google credentials, work or volunteer experience, and most importantly, one's professional reputation. The needle is indeed beginning to shift, and we are now seeing some exceptions to the old narratives of success. In her address, Madam President spoke about the work that schools and institutes of higher learning and the Public Service Commission, employers, and even political parties are doing in this regard. This is good progress, but we must make these exceptions the norm. Failure will have consequences, but we must not and should not bind people to their past failures, denying them the chance to learn from them and shape their futures differently. Embracing failure and giving second chances will help strengthen our social mobility. At the same time, it will encourage people to be bold enough to try new things and potentially fail or innovate. Most importantly, it will make us an even more inclusive society. Mr. Speaker, the second aspect of inclusion is for us to better include those who are differently abled, physically and mentally. Globally, as we all know, COVID-19 has caused untold mental and emotional stress and revealed underlying biases and stigma to those suffering silently. Singapore is no exception. Mental ailments affect us regardless of age, background, and where we live in the world. We all know someone who struggles with mental ailments. I have friends, and indeed immediate family members, struggling with the stigma brought about by schizophrenia, depression, and other silent mental ailments. In my constituency, we've had a number of suicides since COVID-19 started, and I just visited the family of one of the seniors I knew who sadly took his own life. When I worked on cyber safety in the tech sector, I also saw firsthand the impact of social media abuse on social, emotional, and mental health all over the world. I remember dealing with live suicide cases around the world and working furiously with my team and our partners to intervene. Closer to home, I remember one of my residents refusing to call the MSF care line because she felt it was shameful to do so. We need inclusive policies and norms to ensure that people feel safe and unashamed to use mental health resources. When we fall down, we suffer a physical injury. What about mental injury? How do we heal? If we can accept seeking help from our body, there is no reason why we cannot accept the same for our mind. And this is a point that my colleagues, the Honourable Dawn Wee and Fahmi Aliman had mentioned in their own speeches. Mr. Speaker, sir, while we need to do more to be inclusive of those struggling with mental ailments, we also have the opportunity to do more to include those who are differently able physically. I have a friend, her name is Hui Sin. She was born visually impaired, but has adeptly used technology
you need to wrap up.
To her advantage. She texts me using text-to-speech recognition software and is now working in the communications team in the technology department of a multinational. She adapted using technology to augment her ability and benefited from having an inclusive employer who treasured for her abilities. Mr. Speaker, sir, as a young boy, I read J.R.R. Tolkien's work, and he said this. There was a Frodo Baggins, who was the main character, and he said this: "I wish it did not have happened in my time," said Frodo. And Gandalf, the wise wizard, responded, "And so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." Mr. Speaker, we cannot choose the moments in time which
You don't have much
define
time
us,
left.
but we can choose how we define the moments of our time. Just 1 second. 55 years ago, our pioneers found themselves in a moment of crisis, thrust into an independent nation which was never expected to survive. Heroic as they may have been too, it's okay to be worried. Courage, Mr. Speaker, the quality which our pioneers exemplified, is not the absence of fear, but the will to overcome it. In our moment of crisis, we must meet this moment by overcoming our worries and seizing opportunities to build a better future, not clinging on to the shadows of a distant past, by working together in spite of our differences, just as our forefathers did. Years from now, in this very house, our children and future generations will judge us by how we have met this moment. We hope they will judge us kindly, but that is for the future. For today, as long as we do our best, as long as we stick together and stay nimble and courageous with Singaporeans at the heart of all we do, I believe we will have met this moment. Mr. Speaker, sir, I support the motion. Thank you.